This story is titled Disowned My Dad and His Wife When They Tried to Erase Late Mom's Existence. Now they show up demanding to see their grandchild. Hey Reddit, I need to get this off my chest. I've been carrying this for 10 years now, and I feel like I'm losing my mind. Maybe some of you can relate, or maybe you'll just think I'm being dramatic, but either way, here's my story. My mom passed away when I was 14. She was my rock, my best friend, and honestly, the only parent I really connected with. My dad? He wasn't a bad guy or anything, but we were never close. He was the kind of dad who showed love through things like paying bills and making sure the house was running, but emotional support? That was all mom. When she died, I was shattered. It wasn't a sudden thing. She'd been sick for a while, but knowing it was coming didn't make it easier. I spent weeks barely eating, barely sleeping, just existing in this fog of grief. I thought my dad would step up, that maybe losing mom would force us to lean on each other. Instead, he did the opposite. 2 months after her funeral, he started dating someone. I didn't even know he was seeing anyone until I came home from school one day and found a stranger in our kitchen. She was pouring coffee like she owned the place, laughing at some joke my dad made. I froze. She turned to me with this big fake smile and said, "You must be my name. I've heard so much about you." I couldn't even respond. I just stared at her, then at my dad. He had this look on his face, like he was waiting for me to say something nice. Instead, I just walked to my room and slammed the door. Things escalated quickly from there. Within 4 months of mom's passing, this woman, let's call her Claire, moved in. I barely knew anything about her, and honestly, I didn't care to. To me, she was just an intruder, someone who didn't belong. And then, the real kicker. On my 15th birthday, my dad and Claire announced their engagement at my birthday dinner, as if it was supposed to be some kind of gift. I remember sitting there, staring at them in disbelief. My dad looked so happy, like he genuinely thought I'd be excited about this. Claire was practically glowing, holding out her hand to show off the ring. "Isn't this great?" my dad said. I didn't even answer. I stood up, grabbed the cake they got me, and dumped it onto the floor. "I don't want this," I said, my voice shaking. Then I walked out. I didn't go back for 2 days. I stayed with a friend, ignoring the dozens of calls and texts from my dad. When I finally came home, things were different. The first thing I noticed was that all the pictures of my mom were gone. The ones in the living room, the hallway, even the ones in the kitchen, vanished. Her stuff too. The coat she always left by the door, the books she kept on the coffee table, the little knickknacks that made the house feel like home, all gone. "What happened to mom's stuff?" I asked. My dad barely looked up from the newspaper he was reading. "We're moving forward," he said, like that was supposed to be an explanation. I didn't let it go. I started searching the house, opening closets and drawers, trying to find anything that was hers. Most of it was gone, but I managed to salvage a few things. A photo album, a bracelet she used to wear, and one of her favorite scarves. I hid them in my room, terrified that Claire would find them and throw them away. They even tried to force me to celebrate Claire's birthday, while ignoring my mom's. One time, I mentioned wanting to do something small for mom's birthday, just lighting a candle or something, and my dad completely shut me down. "We need to move on," he said, like it was that simple. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home. The house that used to feel warm and safe now felt cold and foreign. I avoided being there as much as I could, spending more time at friends' houses or staying late at school. By the time I was 16, I'd stopped talking to Claire altogether. If she asked me something, I'd give her a one-word answer. If she tried to start a conversation, I'd ignore her. It wasn't mature, but I didn't care. She wasn't my mom, and I wasn't going to pretend she was. My dad hated it. He'd lecture me about how I was being disrespectful, how I was ruining the family dynamic. One time, he even threatened to kick me out if I didn't get with the program. But I knew he wouldn't follow through. He might have been a lot of things, but he wasn't that kind of dad. The breaking point came when I turned 18. I packed my bags and left for university, cutting off as much contact as I could. I didn't look back. At the time, I thought that leaving would be the end of it. I thought I could finally move on and start fresh. But I was wrong. I've thought a lot about why Claire bothered me so much. Aside from the obvious, she wasn't a bad person. Not really. If anything, she was overly nice. Fake nice. The kind of nice that feels more like an act than something genuine. She'd bake cookies and leave them in the kitchen for me, even though I never touched them. She'd ask how school was, even though I'd ignore her. She even tried to buy me gifts, like she thought she could win me over with stuff. But that's the thing. None of it felt real. It all felt like a performance, like she was checking off a list of mom things she thought she needed to do. It didn't help that she completely overstepped every boundary I tried to set. One time I was in my room, looking through an old photo album I'd saved from when my mom's stuff was cleaned out. Claire walked in without knocking and saw me holding it. "Oh, you have pictures of your mom," she said, her voice soft, like she was trying to be comforting. "You know, I'd love to see those sometime." I snapped the album shut and glared at her. "Why? She's not your family?" The way her face twisted, like I'd slapped her, would have been funny if I wasn't so mad. She left without saying anything, but later that night, my dad let me have it. "She's trying my name," he said, pacing the living room like a maniac. "Do you have any idea how hard this is for her? You're making this impossible." "She's making it impossible," I shot back. "She's not my mom, and she never will be." That became our regular argument. Claire would push, I'd push back, and my dad would explode. It got to the point where I barely spoke to either of them. The hardest part was how lonely I felt. I didn't have siblings to back me up, and most of my friends didn't really get it. They'd say things like, "At least your dad's happy," or "Maybe she's just trying to help." They didn't understand that it wasn't about her being nice or not. It was about the fact that my dad didn't seem to care how much I was hurting. Every time Claire did something to try to bond with me, it felt like another attempt to erase my mom. She started decorating the house, swapping out my mom's favorite throw pillows and curtains for her own style. She rearranged the furniture, making it feel less like the home I grew up in, and more like some weird new place where I didn't belong. One day, I came home from school to find her painting the living room walls. They used to be this soft blue, my mom's favorite color, but now they were this ugly beige. I stood there in the doorway, staring at the wet paint, and for a second I couldn't breathe. "What do you think?" she asked, smiling like she'd just done something amazing. "I think it's awful," I said, walking past her and slamming my bedroom door. The beige walls stayed, of course. So did all the other little changes Claire made, each one chipping away at the memories of my mom. It was like she was on a mission to make sure nothing in that house reminded me of her. The thing that really set me off, though, was when Claire started introducing herself as my mom. We were at the grocery store one day, something my dad insisted we do together because it's what families do, when she ran into someone she knew. "This is my son," she said, gesturing to me with a proud smile. I froze. For a moment I thought maybe I'd misheard her. But no, she'd actually called me her son. "I'm not her son," I said flatly. "She's my dad's wife." Claire's face went red, and the woman she was talking to looked super uncomfortable. My dad didn't say anything in the moment, but when we got home, he went off on me. "You embarrassed her," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "Do you have any idea how hard she's trying?" "I didn't ask her to try," I said. "She's not my mom, and I'm not going to pretend she is." That was the first time my dad threatened to kick me out. He didn't follow through, of course, but it was clear that our relationship was never going to be the same. Claire didn't stop introducing herself as my mom, though. If anything, she doubled down. At one point, she started telling people how proud she was of me, like she had anything to do with the person I was becoming. I started avoiding being home as much as I could. I stayed at school late, joined random clubs, hung out at friends' houses, anything to stay away from them. The less I saw of Claire, the better. By the time I was 18, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my bags and left for university without so much as a goodbye. My dad tried to act like he was sad to see me go, but I could tell he was relieved. Without me around, he and Claire could play house without any interruptions. I thought leaving would be the end of it, that I could finally start fresh. But of course, it wasn't that simple. Leaving home at 18 felt like stepping out of a prison. I didn't even cry when I left. My dad gave me one of those awkward side hugs and said, "You'll visit for the holidays, right?" I mumbled something non-committal and left without looking back. Claire didn't even try to hug me. She just stood there smiling like she was sending her own kid off to college. It made me sick. At first, life away from them was bliss. I threw myself into school, made some great friends, and started to feel like I could finally breathe again. I stayed in touch with my dad, but only just enough to keep things civil. I called maybe once every couple of months, and even those calls were short. I avoided talking to Claire entirely. For a while, it seemed like they'd accepted the distance. I'd get the occasional text from my dad, usually something generic like, "Hope you're doing well," or "Your stepmom says hi." But that was it. No pressure, no guilt trips. I started to think that maybe, just maybe, they were finally letting me live my life. Then I met my fiancée. We met during my junior year, and I fell hard. She was everything I didn't know I needed. Smart, kind, and endlessly patient with all my baggage. I told her about my family pretty early on, and she didn't judge me for it. If anything, she encouraged me to set even firmer boundaries. You don't owe them anything, she said. When we got engaged, it felt like a fresh start. I wasn't planning to tell my dad at all, but word got back to him through mutual acquaintances. That's when the chaos started. The first thing I got was a text from my dad. You're engaged? Why didn't you tell us? I ignored it. A couple of hours later, Claire called. I didn't pick up, but she left a voicemail. Hi, honey, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Your dad and I just heard the wonderful news. We're so happy for you and can't wait to meet your fiancé. Please call us back so we can celebrate together. I didn't call back. The next day, Claire posted on social media. It was this long, gushing post about how her son was getting married and how excited she was to be a grandma someday. She even included a picture of us from years ago, back when I still tolerated her presence. I lost it. I made my own post in response, short and to the point. I am not and never was her son, and she will not be a grandma to any of my future children. The fallout was immediate. My dad called me within minutes, yelling about how I disrespected Claire and embarrassed the family. I told him the truth, that Claire wasn't my family and never would be, and hung up. I thought that was the end of it, but I underestimated how stubborn they could be. A few months later, my fiancé and I found our dream home. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was perfect for starting a family. We were still settling in when my dad and Claire showed up unannounced. I have no idea how they got our address. To this day, I'm still not entirely sure. They knocked on the door, and when I opened it, there they were, standing on my porch with big smiles like nothing was wrong. Can we come in? Claire asked, holding a box of cookies like some kind of peace offering. No, I said flatly. You need to leave. My dad tried to argue, but I didn't give him a chance. Turn around and go home, I said, then slammed the door in their faces. I thought that would be the end of it, but a week later, I found out they'd bought a house 5 minutes away from us. 5 minutes. It felt like a nightmare. They didn't call or text to say they were moving. They just showed up one day. When I found out, I confronted my dad over the phone. Why would you move here? I asked, barely keeping my voice steady. We just want to be closer to you, he said, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Claire misses you, and we want to be part of your life again. I hung up. The next few weeks were tense. Every time I went out, I felt like I had to look over my shoulder. Were they watching us? Waiting to run into me at the grocery store? It was exhausting. The final straw came when my fiancé and I were planning our birthing plan. We'd invited close family over for dinner to discuss the details, but one person stood out, my brother-in-law, who normally didn't get involved in stuff like this. He seemed nervous, fidgeting, and avoiding eye contact whenever the conversation turned to my parents. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. What's going on? I asked. He froze. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he admitted that he'd been talking to my dad and Claire behind our backs. They just want to know their grandchild, he said, as if that made it okay. My fiancé went ballistic. Her sister, his wife, sided with us and moved out that night, saying she couldn't stay with someone who'd betray family like that. The whole thing was a mess, but at least we found the leak. We've since locked down all our social media and changed the passwords to everything. It's not perfect, but it's a start. Update 1 point. Hey Reddit, if you've been following this, you already know my dad and his wife moved 5 minutes away from us. Uninvited and unwanted. That alone was bad enough, but things didn't stop there. It felt like they were determined to force themselves into my life, no matter how many times I told them no. At first, I tried to ignore them. I thought, okay, maybe they'll get bored and leave us alone. But that hope didn't last long. A couple of days after I confronted my brother-in-law about leaking our address, I noticed my dad driving by our house. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Maybe he was just passing through. But then I saw him again, and again. It wasn't just him either. Claire showed up at our door twice, always with some excuse. The first time, she claimed she wanted to drop off a welcome to the neighborhood gift, a plant I didn't want and didn't keep. The second time, she came with a handwritten note about how family is the most important thing in life. I didn't open the door either time. I watched her through the peephole as she knocked and called out, "We just want to talk." Eventually, she gave up, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a battle in a war I didn't sign up for. One of the most unsettling things they did was show up at places my wife and I frequented. My wife and I are creatures of habit. We like to go to the same cafe on weekends, the same park for walks, the same grocery store for weekly shopping. Suddenly, my dad and Claire were showing up at all of those places. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. But how many coincidences can you have before it starts feeling intentional? One weekend, My wife and I were at the park, enjoying a quiet afternoon, when we spotted them sitting on a bench about 20 feet away. They didn't approach us or say anything. They just sat there, watching. The same thing happened at the grocery store. We were in the produce section when Claire bumped into us. "Oh, fancy seeing you here," she said, her voice dripping with fake enthusiasm. I didn't even respond. I just grabbed my wife's hand and walked away. The worst was when they showed up at the cafe. My wife and I were sitting by the window, talking about baby names when my dad walked in. He ordered a coffee, then sat at a table directly across from us. He didn't say a word, just sat there sipping his coffee and staring. That was the breaking point. As soon as we got home, I started looking into home security systems. The process of setting up security was a nightmare. Apparently, the demand for installation in our area was high, and the earliest appointment I could get was weeks away. In the meantime, I bought a cheap set of cameras and a doorbell cam to hold us over. One night, the doorbell cam caught something that chilled me to the bone. Around midnight, Claire came to our house. She didn't knock or ring the bell. She just stood there on the porch for a few minutes, looking at the door. Then she left. When I saw the footage the next morning, I felt sick. What was she doing? Why would she come to our house in the middle of the night? I showed the video to my wife, and we decided to call a lawyer. The lawyer told us what we already knew. Legally, there wasn't much we could do. My dad and Claire hadn't threatened us or trespassed. Moving 5 minutes away wasn't a crime, and neither was showing up at public places. The only thing I could do was send them a formal letter outlining my boundaries and consequences for breaking them. So that's what I did. The letter wasn't easy to write. I wanted to be clear, but not overly emotional. I stated that my wife and I wanted no contact, and that any attempts to communicate with us, show up at our house, or intrude on our lives would result in further legal action. Once the letter was written, my lawyer hand-delivered it to my dad. He even had the delivery recorded to avoid any claims of misunderstanding. After the letter was delivered, things went quiet for a while. No unannounced visits, no coincidental run-ins at the park or grocery store. It felt like a weight had been lifted, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was temporary. The silence didn't mean they were gone. I knew they were still out there, just 5 minutes away, probably plotting their next move. In the meantime, my wife and I focused on preparing for the baby. We tightened security around the house, changed all our social media settings, and made a point to avoid our usual hangouts. It wasn't the ideal way to live, but it felt necessary. Even now, as I write this, I'm constantly looking over my shoulder. I don't know if my dad and Claire have truly given up, or if they're just waiting for the right moment to try again. All right, everyone, before we dive into the final update, I have a small request. We put a lot of effort into finding these incredible stories for you every single day, and your support means the world to us. If you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps us grow and allows us to continue bringing you more amazing stories. Now let's move to the last update. Final update. Hey Reddit, here's the final update. First, I want to say thank you to everyone who's commented, messaged, or just taken the time to read my story. Your support has been a lifeline through all of this. Things have taken some unexpected turns, and I wanted to share what's happened since the last post. After my lawyer delivered the letter, I thought the situation might finally settle down. And for a couple of weeks, it did. No surprise visits, no stalking, no awkward run-ins at the cafe or park. My wife and I were cautiously optimistic, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The quiet was broken when my wife's sister, who had been staying with us since the brother-in-law debacle, called me while I was at work. She said my dad and Claire had come by the house while I was gone. They just knocked on the door like nothing was wrong, she said, her voice shaking. They wanted to talk about the baby. She didn't let them in, thank God, but the fact that they'd shown up again, after explicitly being told not to, sent me into a rage. I left work early and called my lawyer on the way home. The lawyer advised me to gather evidence of their continued harassment. Fortunately, I'd been documenting everything: the doorbell cam footage, screenshots of Claire's social media posts, and even a record of the times we'd seen them at public places. The visit that day was just another piece of the puzzle. By this point, I was beyond fed up. I wasn't going to let them intrude on my family any longer. My wife was in her final weeks of pregnancy, and the stress was taking a toll on both of us. She was having trouble sleeping, and every time the doorbell rang, her anxiety spiked. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting my wife and our unborn child. One night, as I was reviewing the footage from our makeshift security cameras, I caught something that made my blood run cold. Around 2 a.m., Claire walked up to our house again. This time, she didn't just stand there. She tried the doorknob. Luckily, the door was locked, and she left after a few minutes. But that was the final straw. I called the police and filed a formal report. While they couldn't arrest her for trying the door, since there was no actual break-in, they took the report seriously and advised me to pursue a restraining order. Getting the restraining order was a process. As I've mentioned before, the legal system in our area isn't exactly quick to act unless there's a clear threat of violence. But with the evidence I'd gathered and the police report on file, I finally had enough to make a case. The restraining order was granted a few weeks later, just days before my wife went into labor. It prohibits my dad and Claire from coming within 500 feet of our house, my workplace, or any place where we might reasonably be expected to be. The timing couldn't have been better. My wife gave birth to our son, a beautiful, healthy little boy, shortly after the restraining order was issued. Holding him for the first time was like everything else in the world melted away. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. But the peace didn't last. Claire decided to challenge the restraining order. She claimed it was unfair and based on misunderstandings. Her argument? That she was just trying to rebuild a relationship with her son and prepare for her role as a grandmother. I couldn't believe the audacity. It wasn't enough for her to insert herself into my life. Now she was trying to fight a legal order to keep her away. Thankfully, the judge didn't buy her excuses. The restraining order was upheld, and the court even added stricter language to it after reviewing the doorbell cam footage of her late-night visits. Since then, things have been quiet. Too quiet. I know they're still out there, living just 5 minutes away, but they haven't tried to contact us again. I'd like to think they've finally realized I'm serious about keeping them out of my life, but I don't trust them enough to let my guard down. My wife and I have taken additional precautions to protect our family. We've upgraded our security system, installed floodlights, and even set up a system with our neighbors to keep an eye on each other's homes. Paranoid? Maybe. But after everything we've been through, I'd rather be overprepared than caught off guard. Now, we're focusing on moving forward. My wife and I are adjusting to life as new parents, and I'm doing everything I can to be the father my son deserves. I don't want him to grow up in a house filled with tension and resentment like I did. Looking back, I've realized that my relationship with my dad was doomed the moment he put Claire above me. Losing my mom was the hardest thing I've ever been through, and instead of supporting me, he chose to erase her memory and replace her with someone new. That's not something I can forgive, and it's not something I'm willing to subject my son to. Angkui. To anyone out there dealing with toxic family members, I want you to know this. It's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to say no. Family isn't about blood. It's about the people who love and support you unconditionally. For me, that's my wife, my son, and the small circle of people who've stood by me through all of this. My dad and Claire might share my DNA, but they aren't my family. Thank you again, Reddit, for listening to my story. Your support has meant more to me than I can put into words. If anything changes, I'll be back with another update. But for now, I'm going to focus on my wife and son. Take care, everyone.